In some cases, you're small and you're more vulnerable. Big companies, big budgets, they've seen their peers be hit with cyber attacks and have robust security professionals like myself, on staff defending the network all the time. Smaller businesses, maybe just like, the kind of the phishing attack against someone's grandmother.
Welcome to Mission to Grow, the small business guide to cash, compliance, and the war for talent. I'm your host, Mike Vanoy. Each week, we'll bring you experts in accounting, finance, human resources, benefits, employment law, and more. You'll learn ways to access capital through creative financing and tax strategies, tactical information you need to stay compliant with ever-changing employment laws, and people strategies you need to win the war for talent. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Asure. Asure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. Enjoy the show. Top 5 things businesses need to understand about payroll security. I am Mike Vanoy with Mission to Grow, and this is a topic that every business owner, every manager of every business needs to understand. I think you might be surprised. When we think security, we tend to think cybersecurity, and there's certainly a technology component. But some of the easiest places for fraudsters to take advantage of small businesses is payroll, and most frequently has nothing to do with technology. So, got a great guest to unpack the topic today. He's a cybersecurity professional who helps keep businesses safe. He specializes in information security, privacy, DevSecOps, that's development security operations, and organizational transformation. He's someone who thrives on addressing complex, multidimensional problems with real-world, out-of-the-box solutions. He's the Vice President of Information Security at Asure. Welcome, Josh Gohman.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this. So much of this show, we talk about HRE kind of things, just because there's so much to keep up on in the compliance world for small businesses,
Oh,
in the
sure.
employment world. But this is really, I'd say, kind of a fundamental topic that people need to get their heads around. What do you think the number one thing that small businesses, especially, say business owners in general, need to understand about payroll security?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the number one thing there is that no business, no entity is too small, right? This idea that I'm too small for the hackers to find me is just a fallacy. They're using automated tools to comb the internet, scrape our different social media platforms to find things about people, and they're just uh, blanketing everybody with attacks just continuously. And because if even only 4% of those succeed, it's still a significant number because they are literally trying to get everything.
You said 4%. That sounds like a really specific number. Does that come from
It
somewhere?
is. It's about 4% of phishing attacks are successful. So that's where that number. And often we see phishing as kind of the leading edge of the cyber attacks. I mean, I think with the last year, Verizon's data breach investigation report showed that like 70% of breaches occur with a human element. That means person did, right? So then that's generally phishing or something like that
Yeah.
that triggered the attack.
The old saying, why do bank robbers rob banks? Because that's where the money is.
Yeah.
Um, I think maybe historically that's kind of where we maybe get this false perception that I might be safe. I might be kind of sort of safe as a small business. They're just going after the big companies where the real money is. Say more, be more specific if you could about, hey, they're spamming everywhere.
Sure.
They're using technology and bots to hit every company. And why is it that you could be small and be just as vulnerable?
In some cases, you're small and you're more vulnerable. Big companies, big budgets. They've seen their peers be hit with cyber attacks and have robust security professionals like myself, on staff defending the network all the time. Smaller businesses, maybe just like the kind of the phishing attack against someone's grandmother, who's not as savvy online. It's the same thing with a small business. They have less staff. They focus on their core business, and oftentimes cybersecurity or IT is not that piece, not the core function of the business. And so, those little things, those gaps in processes, maybe the lack of training, create those seams where phishing or another type of cyber attack could take hold. I think with the small businesses, again, get back to phishing all the time. I think that's the one that, um, really is the most common, most prevalent form of attack.
So the first area that I wanted to dig in with you is kind of I'll say the inside job. Inside job is the wrong way to say it, but it comes from the inside without employers realizing. Of course, you could have a compromised employee
Sure.
doing nefarious things. I think that's not the most common use case. It's probably pretty rare, actually. Would you agree?
Right. Yeah, that would be more rare. Certainly, though, as I mentioned, 70% of attacks have a human element. Well,
Yeah,
that human element's not the attacker. They're talking about your staff, the people in your
yeah,
business.
right.
Again, that phishing email that is sent to an employee that says, "Hey, your password is about to expire. Please click here." And it takes them to a page that looks just like the page that they sign into every day, and they put in their username and password. And I often say it's like you people think hackers are on these black screens typing and trying to break you know passwords or crack code to get in, where the most common uh, attack avenue is really they're just going to ask you for the key and you're going to give it to them.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, that's what they're doing. They're asking you for the key to get in and you give it to
I'm assuming most everybody on on today's call and in listening to this podcast or watching this show online, they know what phishing is. Just explain it for those who
them.
don't.
Sure.
But I want to just go into let's talk about some of the use cases because I think it's interesting. You say 4% of people fall for these things, or 4% are
Yeah.
successful. I think most of us think we have a good eye for this, but these guys are becoming increasingly sophisticated, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So phishing is just a form of what we call social engineering. Used to be called, like the con artist, right? The con. It's just a con that happens through an email or some other text is another common avenue. And it's um, an attack that centers on asking the user to do something, whether it's open an attachment, click a link, or take some action from an email or a text message.
Yeah.
Um, Again, very common one is asking them to reset their password or asking them to put in their password to this site. That link the link out of that email is a um, link to a page that's been crafted to look exactly like the login page. If you use Google or Office 365 or another Adobe or any of these Office products, their login pages will look exactly the same. And the user doesn't know. They go like, "Oh, I just got to put in my username and password." And when you do that, you're literally giving them your username and password.
Yeah.
There is a smaller percentage of attacks that might have that attachment that has malicious software in it that basically the user clicks it and opens it and then it runs on their machine
Yeah.
and then gets access to their network. I think that's probably less common for the type of attacks, especially what we're going to talk about today within the payroll sphere. But certainly something to think about. Good endpoint, all the technical security stuff that you kind of mentioned up front. That's one piece of it. But then, kind of what we're talking about here is really kind of the predecessor to all of that is the human firewall, right? Having you talk about the staff internally to the company, having those people trained so that they can recognize those things.
Yeah.
Going back to that 4%, that we talked about, I think that number is probably skewed a bit because that's across everybody, and you're getting those big enterprises that train people, routinely about phishing emails, right? We get our
Right.
percentages down really
Yeah.
low.
We
It's
have training at Asure all
exactly,
the time
yeah,
where people get trained on how to deal with those things. Yeah.
yeah. I absolutely send fake phishing emails to everybody periodically to kind of keep it in. And we've seen within our company, the percentages were higher. We're almost 10% until we addressed it with training and practical exercises. These phishing campaigns. And we drive our numbers down. Now we're down below 4% now, but again, it shows the value of training the people, creating that human firewall with your staff. Um, and for what it's worth, pound for pound, dollar for dollar, that is the most affordable and effective method of cybersecurity you can start. Usually for a few dollars a year per person. providing some training from a third party vendor, um, that, provide some canned training on how to recognize this stuff. What does business email compromise look like? What are the effects? How do you do it? How is it done? And bringing people up to speed. And just that alone has a significant impact on preventing these attacks.
Do me a favor. I wanna come back to talk about maybe some of the more sophisticated examples
Sure.
of phishing. Something I'm personally seeing. I see phishing attempts much more frequently over text than I ever used to. It used to be an email only thing, and increasingly it's a text thing. But why why is payroll so vulnerable? Because our experience would be that people are probably going to be extra cautious. Like if you get an unsolicited email, hey, give me your username and password to your bank account, you're like, whoa, bank account, what's this about? My payroll system, what's this about? You're already on the defensive.
For
These guys aren't asking for access to your payroll system, they're asking for ways to end route, and right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, most of these attacks that we see actually start with email. So they
Yeah.
get access to the user's email, which really is like the gateway to your digital identity. Because from an email, I can reset all of your account, reset the password to your bank, to your payroll system, to whatever, because it all tracks back. Maybe that's a vulnerability just in general, because email is not a secure system, but um, it is just a factor in the world that we live in, that we trust email, that a person, if they respond to that email, then they are who they say they are. And so the attacks typically start there, um, from an email. And then, you asked about why are we vulnerable to these attacks at payroll, right? So payroll is, you may think of like big breaches like Sony or Target, and sure, hackers that are trying to make a name for themselves, that's one way to do it. But they, even with that data, they have to take it and monetize it, sell it on the dark web. And that's a process. You know, Payroll companies, even small businesses, 50, 70,000. I mean, their often biggest expense, biggest liability is payroll in a small business.
Right.
And so that money is being moved between the small business, the payroll provider, and the bank. And there are some gaps that naturally occur in the ACH process. It takes a few days for those transactions to clear, right? But the payroll company debits money from the small business, and then the payroll company is paying out to the employees for direct deposit. And that gap in between there uh, creates a place where hackers can thrive, right? They can inject themselves in between there, either asking, by compromising an email and asking the payroll company to set up a 1099, right? It looks like it's coming from the right email. We've been talking back and forth, for the last couple of weeks, the last couple of months. He's just asking me to set up this 1099, and they want to pay it today. Or by getting access to the payroll system and changing all of the employee bank accounts to a pay card that the hacker controls, and then on payday, the money is moved to them. They exploit that gap in the ACH system. I think that's obviously very easy to monitor.
I want to go deeper on some of those examples. So
Sure.
we're come back. So the first the first point that we see most common is the hacker, whether it, hey, can you send me, and it's a phone call, text, it's an email, it's trying to get you to give up the credentials to get access to your email. Because once they have access to email, it wouldn't work with us. We have multi-factor authentication. An email alone won't get it. You're going to need other forms of
Hmm.
authentication. The
Hmm.
good systems do this now. Uh, but I mean, just think about everybody in your personal life. How many times, because you got logins to everything, and so you got the login. Oh, you can't remember. It says forgot username,
Yeah.
forgot password. You have to get a login, email. You got to provide
Yeah.
one or the other, and then you just get it. So all you need
Right.
access to. So you're not stopping that human being from even stopping getting their email. You could just be someone else on the account, and at 3 a.m., well, I've stolen Josh's email credentials at 3 a.m. while he's sleeping. I log into some account, I say forgot username, it comes to me, I write it down, I delete it. Josh never knows it even came. Now both of us are receiving his emails. I'm using that information to log into other systems, and accessing those systems gives me information that I can use to log into other systems, and it cascades and it's a path to the purpose of this call to payroll, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Um,
So let's look before we go down the like I really want to talk about the specific ways in which the frauds happen from bank accounts between because you got between business owner and payroll processors, bank accounts. You got from payroll processor to employees. You got from employees to all the people that they pay. There's a few handoff here where they moved in the ACH, the automatic clearinghouse process through our banking systems, where these people try to insert themselves. So we'll go deeper in that in a second. But say more about what these phishing scams can look like.
yeah, absolutely. You know, again, I think they target systems that, you know, they know people use, right? So they know the vast majority of businesses say use Office 365, right? Or they use or Google, but it's more common with Office 365, right? Office 365, the Microsoft suite has a very consistent login, right? It looks the same. Now you can do some things as an organization to kind of tweak that a little bit to make it harder or easier for a user to identify, but not everybody does that. And, you know, the attackers know that. And so they, you know, send an email, um, and it may just be, it could be something as simple as, hey, we need you to log in to keep your password today, or we need your IT department is, you know, requests that you sign into this new application, or as a Dropbox invitation, like sign in with that. Um, and it's generally trying to get a user to take an action, and usually that involves signing into an application to give them credential.
Yeah.
And there's almost always the element of urgency, right? Because most people, if it's not urgent, like, hey, if the attacker asks, hey, in 15 days, you know, we're gonna, you know, you need to log in the next 15 days to keep your password. People are gonna forget about their email. I mean, people forget about legitimate email, like that, right? But if it's something, you know, it's always there's that element of urgency needs to be done right now, or you're going to lose this, or you're going to miss out on something. Um, and and so it's trying to get the user to short circuit their decision making process. They're looking at this email. Normally they'd be moving on to something else, or filing that away for later. But that act or that sense of urgency, you know, prompts them to do something right now. And that's usually that's just an element that we see very common across all types of phishing attack.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, is it any different coming from text? Like one of the things I think about text, I'm increasingly getting these where it's obviously somebody pretending to know who I am, or they're like, or I'm being like, hey, your number was in my contacts, but I don't know who this is. Do I know you? What? And I'm just assuming they're just trying to validate, they're just trying to bait me into some dialogue.
Yes,
But that dialogue could be as simple as validating, oh, yep, I actually do. I guessed I sent that same thing to 5 different phone numbers, trying to figure out which one is Mike's real phone number. And when he
correct.
responds to it, oh, now I've got his phone number. Is that
Yeah, yes. They're definitely trying to validate who they're sending data to. They're definitely trying to even sometimes it's just as simple as getting you to respond, and they'll coax the data. You know, like you said, I have this number, I don't know who it is. You know, you start providing them information, you start having a conversation with them back and forth, they start coaxing more data out, and then they get you in with whatever the hook is. And it could be a lot of, it could be click this link and you download something on your phone. You know, could be, um, you know, a variety of different scams.
And so I would invite people to use your imagination and think about the use cases here. So they don't, maybe I'm, they found my name in LinkedIn. They don't know my email address because I don't make it public. but they make a whole bunch of guesses. They know the domain name of the company I'm at AsureSoftware.com. So they maybe send an email to Mike at Assure, M. Vinoy at Assure, M. Vinoy, Michael Vinoy, and just send it to all the different permeations, whichever.
Right.
Maybe they don't. It's not a. Maybe it not even all that. Trying to get me to click on anything that would raise a red flag. Maybe they're just trying to get a response. And the one that I actually open or respond to, because maybe just simply opening that email, it's an HTML email, they get some validation that the page loaded, and oh, now I know which one it's Tim.
Correct.
And you can run a computer program to run that at scale to millions of people all at once on the other side of the globe.
Yes. And that's exactly what they do. Yeah, that's exactly it. And, often it's really the same, some of the same technologies that are used by marketers and sales folks to generate ad campaigns. Essentially, they use, malicious versions to run phishing campaigns.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is the same automated tooling, the same kind of things. You mentioned HTML emailed with images to track whether you've opened it. The same kind of things that are used in marketing are used by the fishers to run these campaigns.
Okay. So you can see how this is not a big company thing. In fact, the big companies might be more protected. They have more dollars to throw at technology and training and awareness around these things. Small businesses who are more vulnerable because these bad actors can just do this electronically at scale. It doesn't cost them any more to send to 1 million people than it did to send one or two. So they don't know who are they. You're just one of the millions of contacts that they're doing this to.
Right.
So once they have some information, let's explore some of these use cases then. Tell me more about the 1099. I don't know if that was self-evident. What is
Yeah.
it?
So that it could be employed too. I used the 1099 as an example because I do see that as most common. But with that tax starts with, either the business owner or, the office manager or basically the contact that is communicating with the payroll provider. Their email gets compromised. And kind of, as you mentioned, they write some rules to direct traffic from people who they want to communicate with to other folders so that legitimate user of the inbox doesn't actually see those communications.
Yeah.
And so they can have whole communications with the payroll provider about setting up a new contractor or employee. Again, usually it's a contractor because the amount of paperwork is less. I need to pay this contractor. I need to pay this contractor $10,000, $15,000, whatever it is, and I need to pay them today. Again, going back to that sense of urgency. Every good phishing attack or scam has that sense of urgency to try to break down the decision-making cycle of it. In payroll, we know that it's a zero fault tolerant environment. Nobody wants to not get paid on payday. And so if the business owner is telling me this same email address, same person that I've been communicating with for years, it's asking me to set this up and they need it done right now. I want to be a good customer service representative. I want to provide that service to them. I want to do it. I'm going to do it right now. And they're trying to get them out of that type of going through a process of maybe getting an approval or a second person to review this. Or what we do is we out of bands, we call that person that we have on record, their phone number to verify that, but they're trying to get them, they're trying to sidestep that too in some ways where it's like, oh, you need to talk to me? Here, let me call you. And so that we've even had instances where we've seen the fraudsters actually call in and say, hey, yeah, me, it's Joe, at Joe's Pizza. I need this 1099. It's really me. And we set it up. And the point about the gaps in the ACH process is by the time the payment comes out of the bank, right, the fraudster's already left with the money. They've already got the money, and it's very difficult to call that money. So they've already monetized.
I will interject here. We are not going to disclose our means and methods for rooting this fraud out. The good, reputable payroll companies have the high standards like we do. But I just want to kind of restate the business case that you just laid out there, the use case. So your email gets compromised. You don't know your email has been compromised. Now they're getting passwords. They're logging into this. They're logging into that. They're seeing your email. I see I see they're an XYZ payroll provider company, right? It could be Asure, could be ADP, Paycheck, could be whomever, right? So,
Correct.
the emails from them, I know which vendor to call now. So now they call that payroll company or they email that company pretending to be you, and they're sending email making it look like it's coming from you, right? So they might be on the phone, they might be sending emails saying, "Hey, I totally forgot. Just hired this new employee the other day. Payday is Friday. I got to get this submitted today. Can you help me get this employee added to the roles?" Yeah, then 20 hours. It may not even ask for a lot of money here because they're doing this hundreds and thousands of
Correct.
times. So it accumulates to a lot of money for them, but they don't
Oh,
want to
yeah.
raise too big of a red flag, right? And so they might be trying to hire a new employee, but like you say, now I got to provide social security numbers, I got W-4s, I got all this stuff. So the
Correct.
easy thing to do, hey, I just need to. I had this contractor come in. They got to finish the job. They said they're not going to finish the job, and if I don't pay them today, and I got to get this done tomorrow, we're dying. I need to get these guys added right now. It's a very plausible story. This sense of urgency, add a payee, 1099 or W-2 employee
Right.
to the payroll with sense of urgency. It's once they have that information, and it's not hacking the payroll system, it's hacking your email that opens that door.
Yeah. Yes. And it's hacking people. It really, it's exploiting that kind of, the propensity to want to deliver exceptional service, right? That payroll person wants to be on time, wants to be, you know, timely. They want to provide that service to that business, right? And so they're, that sense of urgency kind of kicks in with that same sense of service and wants to just, sometimes gets the better of us. Um, short circuits our better decision making process.
Yeah. And again, we're not going to disclose our methods because we don't want the bad guys to know.
Sure.
But I'd say we're very good at that. But as a business owner, you need to be aware of what risk you're exposed to. Let's pick another one. Pay card example. So how would a scammer assume they've done some phishing to get some credentials?
Yeah.
Um, if I have a pay card, so maybe this isn't the business owner or office manager / payroll manager that's being hacked. It's an employee.
Could be. Yeah.
Sure would love to have, and I'm on direct deposit, and I just want all I want to do, Josh, is change the from this routing number to this account number routing number to go on my pay card. Sounds harmless, right?
Yeah. That's exactly one scenario. Right. And, employees, also vulnerable. The same thing. They can be phished. Um, another example could be the company admin. Certainly the company admin or the business owner is a higher risk because of their elevated privileges within the payroll system, right? Then now the attacker could go in and change every employee. They actually log into the software, right? Because they can reset the password, or they phish the password directly and they just log into the payroll system and then change all of the account numbers. And usually they're pretty savvy enough to be able to poke around the payroll system to know what payday is. And they change it just close enough to payday that you're likely not going to go in and check it yet, right? Because they don't want to change it, a week and a half ahead of time where you might go in and make some changes and see things that are odd. They want to go in right before payday and they want to change, as many employees, potentially all of them, to that same pay card, or maybe it's 2 or 3 pay cards, but either way. And then they just sit back and wait. And the normal payroll process takes its toll or takes its process. Um, and on payday, it's not until employees call and say, "Hey, we didn't get paid today." Does
Right.
anybody even find out that there's been a fraud?
Yeah. So in the prior case, setting up new employees, setting up 1099s to get paid, that requires admin privileges in trying to get the payroll provider, uh, dupe the payroll providers to be part of the scam. What
Right.
could happen here, and I'm going to delay our conversation around the tech
Sure.
where the hacker actually is in payroll systems doing work.
Sure.
Um, but if we stick to just an employee, you know, the employee gets hacked. There's employee self-service. I'm on my phone, and I just want to change my own information. I'm going to change the bank account. So I'm going to, because maybe half my, instead of all my money going to my checking account, I'm going to say 25% now goes into my savings account. But maybe that account is the bad guy, right? So take us through any more detail you can on employees getting hacked versus like payroll admin or owner being hacked.
Yeah, I mean, they really are fundamentally they're the same thing because the attack occurs in the same way. I think employees are probably to some degree a bit more vulnerable because um they're maybe less familiar. That maybe they don't have the training. They're lower down on the totem pole per se. Um, and or maybe they don't have good password hygiene. They're just, oh, it's just my employee self-service account. Who cares? That old thing about I'm too small to be attacked. I'm one person. How is the attacker going to go after me? And not realizing that they're going after everything. Um, and so, again, I think it does really actually fall into um,
It
the
does,
same
but here's
category.
why I wanted to isolate the difference. All a hacker has to do is go into LinkedIn and find out, the names of employees who work for them,
Sure.
right? If you're the boss and someone is pretending to be you, connecting with your payroll company, you're really pretty reliant on your payroll company protecting your boss, right? And shame on you for getting hacked, but also shame on your provider if they allow that fraud to happen and don't have the safeguard like we do. But if your employee gets hacked and you are completely unaware because it's happening through a self-service app that your employee changed their account numbers for their direct deposit, you wouldn't have any idea until the money had left your account, went through the banking system, and is already in the hands. And because it would be your employee saying, "Hey, I never got my full pay." The money is gone at that point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely is gone. And it definitely, it's harder, to identify that did the employee really just change their own account number to some other account and they didn't get paid? Because the logging in the system, they are logging in as the same user. They're logging in as that employee. So those system logs would show that the employee logged in and did this change.
Right.
I think, some of this is down to a people thing. You have to, know your people and you kind of develop that situation and kind of understand what the likelihood of that potential issue is.
Which just screams to the need for training of employees around.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's obvious when, in a company admin gets hacked and they change all 20 employees to the same account. Like, that's pretty obvious that it was a fraudster.
Yeah.
That's not a common, scenario in the payroll world. So,
That's
that
that's the
one's certainly
same
easier
one
to
who
identify.
that's the same one who sends you the email that you just won $1 million from a Nigerian prince, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Not so sophisticated.
Yeah. Not really.
But I bring that use case up of the employees because if your employee gets hacked, they know it's not your fault, but they still don't have any money, and you're the provider of their money. And whether you feel obligated, whether you don't feel obligated, you're going to find yourself in a difficult situation that you
Yeah.
have to front them some pay. I mean, what if they're living paycheck to paycheck?
Yeah.
It's still a terrible situation. Highly, highly, highly encourage training. Okay. So we talked about the 1099 or employees adding fake ones. We talked about pay card, and I guess doesn't have to be a pay card. Could just be a bank account, right? Uh, you're going to route money to a pay card the same way you're going to route money to a savings account versus a checking account versus whatever.
Yeah.
So, what about? I mean, the doozy would be the bank account of the employer, right? And if a hacker is getting access, now let's maybe move to they've successfully gotten into your software. They're not talking to your payroll providers, customer support people. They're in your software, logged in as you. What damage can they do?
Yeah, the big of impact they can. I mean, obviously they could access personal information from all of your employees. I don't want to discount that. I know we're talking a lot about the money. There is still impact, potential impact of them accessing the personal information of your employees, and that should not be underestimated. But I think the biggest risk is them generally changing the employee's bank account. And the reason I say that is because within a payroll system, the only access to the business account is to debit the money out for payroll. If they were to change that account, then that would just not, just wouldn't we wouldn't be able, the payroll provider wouldn't be able to debit money for the payroll. The company would just NSF. They wouldn't really necessarily be able to get access to the company's bank accounts or the money in the company's bank account
Nope.
um, directly from the payroll system. Um, Again, the only way that they do that is by running payroll. And so that comes down to the scenarios that we talked about, creating 1099s, creating false
It would be on
employees,
it
creating,
would be on the back end where perhaps you're
yes,
changing the bank accounts for, so instead of just one employee at a time, one vendor, 1099 vendor at a
correct.
time, now I've changed the same count number, same routing number for all 20 of my employees, and that for the entire gross payroll, boom, in that frustrating.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's generally the way that they get at. I mean, again, if you think about it, the actual target is the company's bank account, but the way they get at it is through your employees or setting up 1099s and by running payrolls and that using that normal debiting process to debit the money out of uh, that account.
Yeah. All right. I want to make tech stack last. I'm looking at the clock here. Uh, so I think we started appropriately internal staff. The most vulnerable place is internal folk. It's almost always going to start with an email hack, whether it's you as an owner, it's an office manager, the payroll manager, whoever the administrator of the payroll function is. And then the ability to steal and hack one employee at a time, your employees are vulnerable, right? So it's not that they're less vulnerable. There's just less to steal on a per employee basis. So,
Right.
right, right,
Yeah. To make it effective, to make it scalable, they try to, they want to attack as many as possible.
right, right. Okay. So now let's move to outside of internal staff. Let's talk about non-staff. I mean, I think this is something that, I mean, if you ever watch the old movie Wall Street, it's the guy, the Wall Street trader, he gets a job as in the janitorial industry, so he can go clean office buildings and see what's on the desks of high officials, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. I think that's, again, that's another area, that companies can be very vulnerable. How are you vetting those external partners? And sometimes, you mentioned the cleaning crew, and that's a perfect example because people often overlook the cleaning crew. And, when you hire new employees or, bank statements or anything else, you leave it out on top of your desk because, like, who has access to this? I lock up at the end of the night and go home. Well, the cleaning crew that comes in after hours has access to everything that's not locked up inside of a filing cabinet or your desk. If you're leaving it out, they potentially have access to those files and that information. And so,
Right.
how are you vetting it? It could be just simple as asking the company that you use, do they do background checks on their people? Right? How do they, do they have insurance? In the event of a theft or fraud that comes back to them, do they have insurance somewhere? Again, that doesn't completely protect you, but it does, offset the risk in some way. And that extends beyond cleaning crews. We use that as, I said, an example, but payroll providers, IT, if you use an outsourced IT provider, you know, don't take their word on things that they're doing. Ask questions. How are they? What security protocols do they have in place? Do they background check their people? Do they have insurance? what experience do they have in security? If you're relying on them for your security services and to protect the technical stuff that we'll talk about in a minute, don't just assume they're doing it, because they may not.
Yeah. Just think about all of the non-employees that come into your work environment. Cleaning crews, delivery people, repair people, um, people that come in digitally, support folk. Hey, let me just could you do a screen share with me? I don't understand the problem you're describing. Can you
Yeah,
just share your screen with me so I can, right? I mean,
exactly.
there's a lot of ways for folks to get access inside the building that you might not think of.
Yeah. Another one is the landlord. If you lease a space within an office building, oftentimes the landlord, the building management staff will have, um, access to the office spaces, because they may provide some maintenance services or whatever. So they may have key cards or access to the building. And again, it's, you may obviously be stuck in a lease at this point, but when you're evaluating those vendors, how you checking, how do they vet their people? What security practices do they have in place?
All right, so just it might sound obvious, but so uh, employees that get their email hacked, that's the number one place that talked about a handful of the ways they exploit that information. I think the number two most common is it's not technical security, technology, it's physical security. And just help me make sure we cover them all. It's locked doors, it's locked file cabinets, not storing any PII, personal identifiable information, or sensitive information, certainly information on top of desks. What what
Right.
other what other precautions should owners be insisting upon in their work environment?
I mean, I think certainly, also like, a security system monitoring, um, you know, alarm system. If it goes off as a 24-hour monitor, do they alert you in the event that the alarm goes off? That's certainly, um, helpful. And the other thing too, I would say is that it's important to assess the risk for every business. Not every business is going to be the same,
Yeah.
So a CPA firm that has tons of digital and paper record that are, very sensitive
Yeah.
is maybe different than the auto repair shop that may have invoices, repair bills, and different things in their office. And so it's definitely assessing the risk, and that's both physical and cyber. They play hand in hand. So it's assessing the risk of what you have. But I would also say on that note, don't underestimate your risk. I find oftentimes people are like, oh, it's not that big, not that much of a risk. Well, you might be underplaying it a little bit, um, but also, just don't spend $100 to protect a $10 bill.
Something you and I didn't talk about before. I want your opinion on them. I think I know what the answers will be, but I think a lot of ways that folks get themselves in trouble is just record retention, right? So, um, hey, new employee, here's your forms. A lot of people still work in paper forms for onboarding.
Sure.
Many times they'll even get a copy of a voided check so I can set up your direct deposit for you. Um, but there's no need to actually keep and store that information, but yet they're sitting in file cabinets, could be years old of
Yeah.
employees' information. What's your guidance for folks around just record retention, record keeping, and storage? Because it might be smart to lock the file cabinet, but it might be even smarter to not to have the need for a file cabinet.
Correct. Yeah. You bring up a great point. Don't keep anything longer than you absolutely need it. Right. And, I can't tell every business how long they need to keep, certain records. I mean, certain things you can speak in some generalities within the HR, like for example, like wage and hour disputes, the statute of limitations is 3 years. So keeping records beyond 3 years in to support a claim like that, um, isn't really necessary. And the more data you have is a more liability. Whether it gets lost or stolen or whatever, if you have it, it's your responsibility. If you don't have it, That's not your responsibility.
And so you can buy a little stamp and you can redact the sensitive pieces of
Good. It's one
information
option.
if you want
Yeah.
to, or you simply don't keep it. Like I've talked to business, I've seen it firsthand. Business owners, they
Mhm.
got a copy of a voided check as part of the onboarding kit, and years later, they employees that don't even work there anymore, and there's their checking account with
Right.
their bank account and routing number right there.
That's a
Uh,
risk. Absolutely.
and there's just and that should have been thrown. That's not thrown away. It should have been destroyed
Correct.
immediately after it was keyed into the payroll system because the employer had no need for that information the moment that that was entered into the system.
That's exactly right. It goes back to looking at each piece of information and saying, how long do I really need? What's the purpose of this? How long do I really need it? I
Yeah.
need that voided check to the point where I input the data into the payroll system. That is the extent of what I need that.
Josh, I want to a couple more topics that I want to talk about. I certainly want you to give guidance around tech stack, and we'll make that our last topic. What should people be putting in for hardware and software to protect themselves and their companies, their employees. But just maybe first, another area of vulnerability is what we in the payroll business we would call exceptions.
Yeah.
Uh, it's the short-term employee, it's the one-off paycheck, it's a bonus
Mhm.
check. You know, maybe rattle off the most common ones and why do those create vulnerabilities? What should people do in those situations?
Yeah. Yeah. This is the third leg of the kind of what I call the tripod of security, right? Yeah. People, processes, and technology. We talked about people. Now we're talking, this is processes. And in a second, we'll talk about technology. And of those three, I think people and process are the biggest. And technology, actually, for most people, is the smaller of the three, right? And so processes. So thinking about um, how you handle exceptions. So something that's out of cycle. So we talked about setting up that 1099, right? You know, business, Jim from Jim's Pizza does it, has never set up a 1099, right? Then I don't have contractors in my business. And the business is asked, the business, right, allegedly through this email, is asking the payroll provider to set up a 1099. That by definition is an exception. And so having talked to your payroll provider before it happened about how do you handle exceptions? This is what I want you to do. A request ever comes through that's out of the ordinary, or just ask them. You don't even have to have the solution. Just ask them what they do when they get an out of cycle or um, out of the norm request, whether it's run an extra payroll, run a bonus pay, run this payroll for this 1099, right? What is their exception process? Do they step out of that single user, ask for, get someone else to take a look at it, get an approval? Do they have a process for handling that exception? Have they thought about what it is? That also goes back to what we just spoke about vetting your third party vendor, right? Talking to them and asking them how they handle different security incident or events. Well, infections is one of them. You're relying on the payroll provider to handle these processes for you. And so you need to understand between you and them how these exceptions and these out of cycle processes and how the approval is. Maybe it's a phone call. Maybe it's um, you know, uh talk with third party. Maybe there's a business partner, right? That it like, look, for if you get something from me that's suspicious, call my business partner. Right. Here's his phone. Keep his number. And that is some way that and that can be something that you want to set up with your payroll provider. They may also have their processes internally, which, yeah, all the big ones that you mentioned before, they all have processes like this. Certainly we do
Yeah.
too, for handling and vetting potential fraud. But it's important to know and have a plan up front so you're not guessing what happened.
Joshua, assuming most people watching this show either use one of the big providers like us
Sure.
or it's their CPA. There's a there's this minority probably that are using uh small, maybe regional kind of unknown providers. There's risk.
Sure. Sure.
So beyond the provider, what kind of process risks does the employer themselves have?
There's always the single point of failure risk. So you have one person, you know, You have that office manager that's been with you for 30 years and they do they know everything. They know all the processes. They know everything.
Yeah.
And there's obviously a risk that they could retire, right? Everybody's theoretically going to retire somewhere. They could win the lottery. They could whatever, right? They could get ill for an extended period of time, which is not even, you know, and then now what do you do? Who picks up the process for that person? Because they literally knew everything. So
Right.
part of, maybe how do you deal with exceptions would be, is the process documented? Is could someone else pick it up if, Joe or Sally or whoever take a sick day or extended sick day, right?
Yeah.
Having that process documented, even just writing it down, right, makes the process more robust because now it's documented. There's an actual process. We know it's not just in somebody's head. So if there is an exception, written down, and you know what.
Great. Let's maybe spend our last few minutes on.
Okay.
Is there anything else on process you want to talk about before we jump to last topic of technology?
No, I think that largely covers it. The big ones are we got to.
Yeah. Reiterate, the biggest is people. A people, process, technology. People is that's the most vulnerable,
Mm.
biggest area, most common fraud attempts that we see in the business. But let's talk about tech,
Sure.
because the people and the tech frequently go hand in hand. Getting you to click on something. Maybe I'm not asking for you to enter username and password credentials into a fake website. But I could be putting some malware on your machine that is doing the work for me, right?
Absolutely. Certainly. And so that gets into, what security systems do you have in place on the individual workstation? It goes back to, antivirus, or what we call modern technology, endpoint detection and response, which is just a more advanced antivirus type software, something that can detect that malicious software that's running, and ideally stop it in its tracks before it ever run, quarantines you, and then quarantines it, and then notifies somebody that, that this is there and needs to be cleaned up. I think that's probably what people think of very often. Certainly the next one would be firewalls. If you have a network within your office, having even a modern small business or a lightweight enterprise router, they're not terribly expensive. That can protect against those network attacks from outside. And then, as many businesses, I mean, most organizations now are moving everything. Even if you don't think of it as moving cloud, it is. So, like Office 365, we talked about. Gone are the days where people are hosting servers in their closet. The
Right.
Exchange email server in the closet here. There it's in the cloud. It's Office 365 is being hosted for you. And then, do you have controls within Office 365 turned on? Sometimes there's free security settings that can be turned on. Sometimes they cost a little bit of money. You just kind of have to look at it. But things like link detection, right? Link verification. So that link that gets put into the email that the user wants, or the hacker wants the user to click on, does when the user click on it, does, Outlook or Office 365 scan that link, say, hey, warning, this is bad. It stops it in its tracks, just like the antivirus stopped it on the workstation. Link verification, link detection can do that, right out of an email.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about it, training people, that there are tools within Office 365, to send phishing emails, to test people. From there, for the average small business, if you don't have an internal IT person, considering, having an outsourced IT provider that can come in, even if it's just on a part-time consulting basis to help get some things set up, security around the email system, security around the endpoint, the user's workstation, and then any locations where you have files and data, having tools around that to make sure that that data is not being exfiltrated.
Right. Right. And I mentioned it earlier. It goes without saying, whomever you choose to do payroll with, whether
Yeah,
you're logging into QuickBooks or you're logging into Assure,
sure.
make sure that you have multi-factor authentication. Can you speak
Yes.
to modern what for folks who don't know it, what is multi-factor authentication and why is that so important? Because it kind of goes back to the top of the conversation around email hack.
Sure. Yeah. So multi-factor authentication is an additional step that a user has to go through during the login process. So we are all familiar with putting in our username and then entering our password and then getting into a system. Multi-factor authentication, or MFA, is just adding an additional step. It's sending a code to yourself, with using a soft token app that generates a code on the app. It's sometimes getting a prompt through a push notification on your phone. It's basically that out of band uh, third step to the authentication process. Could also be, um, uh, we see it on our phones now, Face ID, fingerprint. Those are all forms of multi-factor authentication. In fact, more and more, we're moving, the industry's moving away from passwords and just going straight to that third step. Because if the password is the weak link, uh, just skip that and go right to the real security step, which is that MFA. But you mentioned MFA, you kind of hit on it in the beginning. I'm going to hit it again here because I think it's that important. Email, email, email. All of your email accounts, personal email, business email, etc., all should have MFA turned on, because if a hacker can get in to that account, they can um, get access to all of the other much more important, much more sensitive accounts that you may have.
Right. I mean, almost all this stuff happens digitally, but if you have a serious criminal that has potential score of a lot of money, they might be all digital, getting access to everything except for perhaps your cell phone, because they need that cell phone to get the multi-factor authentication.
No,
I mean, the final knockout punch could be a physical crime, right?
could
That,
be.
that you might not even be aware is related, right? You
Right.
get, you get, could be an assault. I don't want to be overly dramatic here. Could be a pickpocket, right? But these guys are always they're never one step ahead of Josh, but they're one and two and 5 steps ahead of most of the rest of us, right?
Yeah.
And they're getting better at it every single day.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, it goes without saying, if you do have a cell phone, most everybody does, have a pin on it, have a password, avoid the patterns or other kind of weaker, authentication measures, Face ID, fingerprint, those are all excellent, methods of securing your device. If someone does gain physical access to the device, it makes it very difficult, to get into it. I guess probably should go without saying the timeout that you have. Some people will like to push that timeout as long as possible, 30 minutes. You know, you kind of defeat the point of having the passcode on your phone if you have the timeout at 30 minutes. But,
Yeah.
so
Right.
try to find something in the middle that's a little bit less likely, to create that gap in security.
Yeah. Josh, anything you would want to say in closing here?
Yeah, I think I just want to reiterate what we started with. Nobody is too small to be hacked. That, if you're not thinking about how systems will fail, the attacker's already out, figured out how it's going to fail. So it's whether it's a gap in process or training in people, thinking about how something will break is more important than thinking about how it could break.
Well said. It- What I started with, I think we naturally think cyber security.
Yes.
We think, oh, this is tech. And then, of course, we won't trust the stranger walking in the building. And who's that person in the clinic? I don't know them. It's our own staff and it's us that are most vulnerable as business owners and managers of companies. And hack starts with phishing and email. And you're none the wiser. They're not, they're not hacking into the big payroll providers. They're not hacking at our systems and our data centers at Amazon, right?
Right.
They're
That's exactly
hacking,
right.
they're hacking your email, and that opens up Pandora's box.
Right.
Josh, enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you.
And thanks to everybody for joining. If you had value from this conversation, if you liked it, I invite you to comment, share, and hopefully subscribe on YouTube or your podcast platform of choice. Until next week, thanks again, Josh.
That's it for this episode of Mission to Grow. Thanks for joining us today. For show notes and more episodes, visit us at missiontogrow.com. If you found this content valuable, I invite you to share it with a friend and subscribe to the show. If you really want to help, I'd love it if you left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Mission to Grow is sponsored by Asure. Asure helps more than 100,000 businesses get access to capital, stay compliant, and develop the talent they need to grow. To learn more about how Asure can help your business grow, visit AsureSoftware.com. Until next time.